Hey. So I've never given a talk this early, so I hope everybody's awake. It's a really easy topic. It's about cryptographically secure random number generators. So yeah, it's probably the best topic to start it early in the morning. I'm an independent consultant for IT security and large-scale distributed systems, so HPC installations, web clusters, and the like. On the agenda, there's a different title for the talk, unfortunately. I use this one because it's it fits the talk more. There used to be, just to explain why it's called Because You Random Isn't Everything. There used to be this really well-known, or there still is around, blog post by Thomas Pacek, a cryptographer from Matasano and later on different companies, about why you should always use def urandom on a Unix or a Linux system. I'm going to go into some details why this isn't always true. In general, it's true, but there are corner cases, and there is a lot of things that people seem to still get wrong when they're dealing with RNGs. Okay, so easy intro. Why do we need to random? Why do we need random numbers? You need to randomize stuff in your operating system or in your programming language. The easy and probably not best example is the CMAN page for round, or Python US urandom, where you get the urandom device. One example would be TLS session cookies. These are randomized. Session tickets, sorry, not session cookies. Then there is key generation, for example, for RSA keys and for Diffie-Hellman. Another example would be sync cookies in your TCP stack on your operating system. And the really bad example is bash random, which will output a couple of random numbers. So what is a CSPRNG? Cryptographers usually talk about a CSPRNG, which is an acronym for cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. Most of you would still call it an RNG or random number generator. To keep this talk not too verbose, I will probably call it RNG or random number generator during the talk as well. But most crypto nerds, in my experience, tend to call them CSPRNGs. I don't really care what you call them, as long as they're secure. And as long as it's a secure construction. I need to see my own slide. So they are widely implemented in operating system kernels, obviously. As you've seen on one of the last slides, you need them for very basic things or very, very important things like TCP and TLS, either in user land or in the kernel. There is now a TLS stack for the kernel, by the way, on Linux. So on Linux, this would be the def urandom device. The man page has been wrong for years. And this is the reason why there's been a lot of discussion, either in implementations, in programming languages, or within the Linux kernel developer community. So the man page has been fixed, I think, late last December. It has been wrong for more than 10 years. And it's just the basic things about how entropy is gathered in the kernel and how it's used and how you actually get information about entropy that is available. That's wrong in there. There have been many myths about what you should actually do to achieve better boot time entropy on embedded systems and even on a large server farm if you clone instances. And there have been many really bad approaches to that. For example, Canonical had a script that was called Pollinate. It was just basically a bash script that would seed instances for, like Juju is their stack for large server deployments. And they would just seed over HTTP with stuff you could intercept. So you, like somebody that was able to intercept traffic on the I'm really tired. On the hosting network, could just easily modify the seeds of every instance that would be cloned. And that was, for example, a reason why they did that. Like there used to be interfaces exposed to the user that would show you a number about the entropy that is available in the system, but it didn't really matter what the number said. It was usually more than enough for everything that was going on right after the first boot up, like after the first couple of seconds. For FreeBSD, the device is def random, like either urandom or whatever random. It always links to def urandom. It has been the same implementation for a long time. They had a problem with it in my development branch where they fucked up AS and I instructions, basically the RDC process where they were gathering entropy from modern Intel processors was broken in one branch. I don't think it was an active release branch. It was a development branch as far as I remember. There's been some news, like they replaced the RC4 algorithm with an in-kernel secure random number with CHA-20 through an API. That's basically, they basically copied that from OpenBSD as far as I remember. On Windows you have RTL gen random and another syscore. And in programming languages you have different functions exposed. For example, in Python you have via import US you have urandom. In PHP you have rounds, which isn't really secure. Maybe in newer versions. There have been some bad bugs for a long over the time. Obviously, you had Debian predictable keys, which was due to a userland error. Where one of the Debian developers was trying to fix a val grind, so a memory issue, and by accident messed with the random number generator. Many use the kernel-provided CSPRNG. Many programming languages, others use OpenSSL, or even worse, custom random number generators, which is bad. I'll come back to OpenSSL. OpenSSL is a user space library, as most of you know. And as far as I know, there has been a recent blog post by the OpenSSL core team that they'll look into their random number generator facility and how it works, and that they'll do a proper audit of it. I'm not sure where they are right now with that, but for most use cases, the OpenSSL RNG is quite good for TLS, but I don't know if it's really audited for general use cases you might want in a programming languages. And I haven't seen proper audits of it. I know that some people have public and private bugs with the OpenSSL RNG, at least in earlier versions. And there has been a really recent issue with GCC, which generated incorrect code for RD-rand and RDC intrinsics, which was just nice to put in there. So even your compiler could get this wrong, right? Even your compiler could mess with RD-rand and RDC specific code that you might use to build a custom random number generator, right? So you really have to know the whole stack, the whole operating system. To get this right. So some history, yeah. The def and def random devices have been used for used to be really old code, and originated by Ted Zhou in the Linux kernel, at least in the early 90s. Haven't been changed around a lot as far as I know, except for minor documentation commits and some bug fixes that haven't been really security disasters. Again, the mem page has been wrong for a really long time and was only fixed last December. So the mem page was the reason why many people have this wrong understanding about kernel entropy and what it means. Sorry. And there's also this myth that comes from this mem page that you should use tools like HEFGHE or other tools that will improve your system entropy on embedded systems or on your server farm. This can actually make things worse depending on what you use and which platform you're on. There's this nice blog post by DJB on entropy attacks, for example, if you want to look into more academic details of that. So the old kernel implementation in Linux up until 4.1 or something like that was mixing different pools of interrupts. And it was quite complicated to understand even for well-versed C programmers, in my opinion at least. I talked to a couple of people who were kernel developers and said they're not touching it. They know it works, but they don't really know how it works. It worked, as far as I know, without large incidents, probably because of pure luck, and some of the researchers that looked into it just gave up, as far as I know. I talked to a couple of them. They said, yeah, it's just not that interesting of a topic to work on. But there's two really well-written blog posts about that. One is by Aaron Topnons. It's about the old Linux kernel random number generator facility, so defu random. And there's an academic paper from 2012 with like 25 pages that explains the old random number generator facility in the Linux kernel really well. So if you want to get into that, you can read up on that. But it's not the current implementation. So the current implementation is a different one. After long discussions and advice by cryptographers and security engineers, the design was changed in a random C jar device. And it's based on the old pools that they already have in there, and ASNI instructions, if they're available on this on the platform. So if you're running on a modern Intel or AMD CPU, you'll have these instructions available. So ASNI has these RD seed instructions, and they are XOR to charger 20. So even if there would be like, so the idea behind this comes originally, as far as I know, from Google's branch of OpenSSL, which is called Boring SSL by Adam Langley. The idea is if Intel has like this intention to have a bad seed in his, or is biasing the seed of the CPU, or somebody like the Chinese manufacturer of some chips was messing with the hardware and would bias the output of this instruction, like storing it against this PRF charger 20, you would still have a secure output, and that with like high performance. And it's quite neat, and it's backtracking resistant, so that means even if you have at some point in time you find out what the seed would be, you cannot go back in time and find out earlier, how do I say that, earlier states of the random number generator. That's like the easy way to explain it. That's like not a really good benchmark, but you can see that it's quite fast. Right? So that's like 90 megabytes with DD, and DD used to be like a couple of megabytes with the old implementation. Of course, you can do a proper benchmark. Apart from that, there's been other major work overhauling the crypto code in the kernel that started with Linux 4.2. So there's a backtracking protection was added. This is this commit. One nice thing I found in the whole development history was like this post by that. So was with defu random, we were always emitting more bytes than we needed. Always more bytes than we had entropy available, because not blocking was considered more important. Previously, we were relying on the security of SHA-1 with ASCT DRVG, which is the internal kernel developer name for the new design. We rely on the security of AES. It doesn't track entropy anymore, because the cryptographically secure random number generator, in their terminology, is faster. So the exposed, like there used to be this proc device that was exposed that would tell you how much entropy the kernel has available, and that's just gone. So people cannot mess with that anymore, or try to write more entropy into the random device. They replaced the urandom pool with a CRNG. There is a couple of other nice comments on that. And one important thing is like this post by Nikos from GNU TLS. I know when I share this opinion to the defense, they will have to provide a call which doesn't make applications fail in the following scenario. Crypto SSL libraries are compiled to use get random because it's available in the libc and in the kernel, everything works fine. The administrator downgrades the kernel to a version without get random because this network card works better with that version. Mayhem as application phase. So you may have heard that there's this get random syscall that is now in newer versions of libc that is exposed to people. But yeah, this would be like a way to break user-land applications that rely on that. So they also made urandom scalable for silly user-land programs. That was the commit. It's just something that is specific to NUMA systems with a lot of cores and with a lot of sockets. Sorry. So yeah, and the myths in the man4 rampage were finally corrected. Again, that took years, and it's one of the major things. It's so important for this talk because it's why a lot of the programming language designers were so hard to convince that they should change what they were using to use the operating system provided random number generator. So to go into that, Ruby has been using since really early versions the OpenSSL random number generator, which is designed for TLS, and as far as I know, it's quite secure for TLS, but it's not a general purpose RNG, or at least it hasn't been properly audited as far as I know for that use case. There has been this really long discussion about changing that. So I found a bug report in the Ruby core language bug tracker, where somebody noticed that like a couple of years ago and said, are you guys changing that at some point? Using the OpenSSL RNG might not be the best option available, just use urandom on if it's available, or depending on which operating system you're on, choose the appropriate kernel facility. So I picked this bug report up and then posted it on Twitter, among other things, and sent it to a couple of people. And like a lot of security engineers and cryptographers were chiming into the thread and writing them they should change this. And they really didn't see why. So it's like, I got a response with please don't root to like a really long and intricate discussion about why they should change this. And they also said like secure random, that's like the facility in Ruby for secure random numbers and bytes without OpenSSL or comparable alternatives is nonsense. So I think that's a legendary bug, just because it goes on forever. It's like almost 50 messages or something like that. And then in the end, after they changed the mem page for the Linux kernel in late December, they actually changed the whole facility. Like 10 cryptographers and security engineers trying to convince them with like dozens of blog posts. I posted a couple of academic papers on the topic. Didn't convince them to change the secure random facility from OpenSSL to something that is more sane. What they do now is use something similar to what Frank Dennis wrote, libsodium. They have their own implementation that is kind of based on what OpenBSD does. But their design, I've looked at it, it actually looks quite sensible. So depending on which system you're on, it will use the appropriate kernel facility. Because you might not always be on Linux, right? Some people will use Ruby on Windows or on OpenBSD. Yeah, for the time being, Tony Aricheri wrote a wrapper for the thing, which was called sysrandom. That was just an replacement that would just override the function call and use urandom. Or he actually used libsodium in that, or the relevant libsodium code. I think Frank Dennis is giving a talk on libsodium later on in the day if you're interested in what the whole library does. It's a really, really good cryptography library in my opinion. And the code is quite good. There could be more comments, but apart from that, it's very readable. So Node.js is a similar story to Ruby. There has also been there's a bug report on GitHub for the same thing with a couple of hundred messages. It's at least 200 to 300 messages with normal users that have no idea of the topic.
just writing something like this guy is right because I like him. So the whole thread is completely useless by now. I just gave up on it. I don't think they're changing that. The latest comment when I looked into it was that OpenSSL landed a commit to use a different DRBG, and yeah, we can use that. So yeah, they think it's best to use OpenSSL for the time being. Node.js, for example, has their own tree of Node.js has their own tree of OpenSSL in their code. So all of the libraries they depend on, they just take a snapshot of and will have a copy in their own tree, which they maintain. So they have their own version of OpenSSL they need to maintain for that, just for some basic function calls like random. In my opinion, that's like an extra burden for a programming language to have. Like you have to maintain your own version of OpenSSL you're depending on. They also do that for other libraries, by the way. Same issue with Erlang, as far as I know. Like I looked at it and it looks exactly the same as Ruby and Node.js. As far as I know, nobody brought it up with the Erlang people for now. I wrote to some of them, some of the developers, but I haven't really got any feedback. It was like a year ago already, more than a year. Yeah, Python has been secure for a long time. Like there isn't any issue with Python 2 or Python 3 when it comes to secure random numbers. It will use the appropriate facility depending on the operating system you're on. Although it's called us.urandom, it will always use the appropriate facility from the kernel. But they have an improvement lately in Python 3 if there are insecure values in some corner cases. So yeah, the OpenSSL RNG, why shouldn't you use that? It's not thread safe, it's user space, and it's prone to bugs. So if somebody wants to attack the RNG in a certain application and doesn't have access to the application itself, or it's like a distributed system where they would access this facility on another machine, it would make sense to attack, for example, the OpenSSL RNG. And it's not even, like if you look at the issues, the open issues in OpenSSL and the wiki from OpenSSL, it says do not use this as a RNG for anything serious except for maybe TLS, because we're using that for TLS as well, and that works quite well. So and that's the stuff I brought up with the Ruby guys, and in Node.js, like I told them, even the OpenSSL team says you shouldn't use their RNG for like general purpose things that aren't TLS specific, and nobody was convinced by that. I don't know. Many people bring that up. There is this tool that is called HefGRG that has been around for, I think, more than 10 years, 15 years. So somebody brought it up recently in a discussion of a crypto mailing list again. Why you should or should not use HefGRG to improve your entropy and your randomness on your system. Like that's what they thought. So one guy was brave enough to mail all of the 10 core maintainers of HefGRG, out of which one replied, and most of the mail accounts were bouncing. The one maintainer that replied from HefGRG told us he hasn't looked at the code for more than 10 years. He's sure that it's quite secure still. But it's completely unmaintained. He didn't say that, he said it's secure still. He thinks like the general way it works should still work. Then I looked at the code and at the early papers, and most of the facilities are designed for old Spark systems. So they'll use specific interrupts to from Spark CPUs, or earlier Intel CPUs. There are no current security contacts. There has been no security audit of the code except for the one in the original academic paper by the original authors, and it doesn't really improve any security at all. It might even bias your entropy even more. So people come back to me, like I've given a similar talk at SHA. And people were coming up in the Q&A afterwards, what about embedded systems? Why shouldn't we use HefGRG on there? So ideally on an embedded system, the manufacturer that puts out a device would have a kernel developer that adds the appropriate codes to get proper randomness for a certain device into the Linux kernel, depending on what an embedded system exposes or what facilities it has. Like if it's an embedded system without a network card, without a real-time clock, yeah, that's bad, but half GAG won't make a difference there. And I think I only have 5 minutes left, and that's it. So questions. Sorry, I'm still very...
So, any questions? I know it's really hard at this time of the day to ask questions. The first person to ask a question gets a bottle of Mata. No? No takers? No? It'll wake you up. Yes, there you go. Question at the back. People will do anything for this. Have your Mata and the microphone, sir.
Hello. When you often said in your talk that you weren't able to convince people to improve things or not to do things, from your point of view, what would be needed in the future to convince people not to do things that will break other things?
You mean for example, the Ruby core developers?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but what was needed in their case was for the Linux kernel documentation team to change the random number mem page, and that was it.
Okay.
So they were completely, like, all of the statements were completely relying on statements made in the old and wrong random mem page. Since that was fixed last December, they said, okay, we're going to use something that looks more convincing, and they actually did some research on that. It really depends on the developers you get to speak to. I mean, some of them are really stubborn, others will be easy to talk to and convince, at least, especially if there's like 10 people telling them the same thing. Some of them have great academic track records, but they just didn't care. It really depends on the project and the people you're dealing with, I guess.
So, in general, it would be more people pitching in and talking to people.
I mean, on some of these bug reports, we had like 5 cryptographers and a couple of security engineers writing to them and telling them the same thing over and over again. And I sent them like 10 academic papers on the topic and like linked to the OpenSSL wiki and mem pages and everything, but that didn't help at all. Only after the Linux kernel documentation team changed the mem page around to something sane, they actually changed the way they expose the random number generator in secure random in the function calls of Ruby. So yeah, it really depends on the project you're dealing with and the people you're dealing with, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
There is no general answer to that. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I can bribe you with more bottles of Mata if you want. Oh, another question. As soon as I mention that, everybody wants to ask questions.
Can I choose the type of bottle? Yeah. Can I choose the type of bottle?
Yeah, you can have beer as well.
Oh, great. Why is the random generator sufficient for OpenSSL, but not sufficient for other things?
It's only been audited for TLS, so for the TLS use case. People have been looking at OpenSSL in general. If they audit it, they've been looking at it as a TLS library. But some people, it's a general cryptography library, right? You can use it for disk encryption as well, or just handshakes in like your custom crypto protocol you're trying to build. But most of the security audits have been focused on TLS, and as far as I know, there hasn't been a proper audit of the random number generator. But from what I know from, like, for example, Google security engineers, they looked at it, at least for the TLS use case and for the stuff they were using it initially for. They changed the whole facility afterwards in CSPRNGs in their own fork of OpenSSL, which they use internally. But for that use case, as far as I know, it's secure, but there hasn't been a proper audit. The OpenSSL team has announced that they're going to do a proper audit and change the design of the random number generator in the future. So there has been a recent blog post, I think like two months ago or something like that.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? By the way, the offer. Oh yeah, see, more people want Mata. This is a one-time only offer, eh? It's only for the early birds that come to the first talk.
Just small questions regarding virtual machines. How do you deal with, flow VM implementations that are relying on iOS NI command or instruction set, which is basically sometimes broken on VM? So what is the impact of having, for example, broken VM implementations, not properly using the instruction set for the iOS NI?
Come again?
So if you have a set of VMs and you have one VM implementation that are not properly having the instruction set from the home OS or the home hardware, where the iOS NI instruction set is available, but then they virtualize a set of the instructions. What is the impact of flawed implementations on the VM side for such kind of things?
I still didn't get you, sorry.
Okay. We can talk about it later on if you want.
But you're asking about virtualized environments machine. And ASNI? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you seen some broken implementation on virtual side on those one? Or?
Like, it's very possible that there are some bugs, but I haven't seen anything in that direction. It's probably best to talk to people from VMware.
Okay, thanks.
But we can talk about it later. Like, there's probably stuff on the topic around, but I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, I try to find some stuff, but it's very obscure, and sometimes you find indeed some bugs, and it's not very clear on the VMware side and so on. So,
like, if you have, one of the common bugs is if you have VMs and you clone an instance and you have the same seed already on the system, then yeah, obviously it's an issue. But that's kind of fixed in most of the distributions, at least by now, due to various facilities in the user lab.
Okay, more questions? Okay, well, thanks. Please give Aaron a very special early morning round of applause.